integrated. They've created a situation where the predominant youth culture in this country is essentially Afro-Caribbean, and the patois, which I struggle hard to understand, which teenagers speak, is Afro-Caribbean. Right? There's been integration. And it wasn't done by force-feeding kids samosas until they had enough. It was actually done because people fought back, and despite the ideas in their head at the beginning, they began to recognise they had more in common than what differentiated them skin colour. And that is a point I just want to come back to for Marx. I think class struggle is back. Maybe we can discuss this. And I think it is the experience of the unfairness, a gut feeling in people that actually we've been made to pay for this crisis, that is unfair. And our job is to help and develop that. And I just want to end by saying this. Marx said, every revolution, and he was talking about a year of revolution in Europe in 1848, which he lived through, begins with flowers and celebration. And it usually begins with the idea that the people are united against a tyrant, against a Thatcher, against whoever it is. And then people begin to see that actually the people aren't united. You can actually see it in a negative way around what happened 20 years ago, which we should celebrate, the fall of the Berlin Wall. But at the beginning of the idea, we're all in it together. And now the reality of Eastern Europe, and actually former East Germany, which, I was amazed going back to Berlin, that the wall might as well still be there in many ways. The gap between East and West in Berlin is just so bloody obvious, right? In terms, and the reality that actually we're not all in it together. The false promises that were made at the time that wealth was going to flow into all these countries. It begins with that, and then actually people begin to differentiate, and people begin to see class coming out. And we have to win the argument, and that will start spontaneously. But at the end of the day, the idea that Marx puts forward of socialism, that we don't just want a level of political democracy, a tiny percentage of political democracy that we've managed to squeeze out of this system by fighting for it. The right to vote, essentially. To elect MPs we've got no control over. And MPs have got very little control over the government itself. And the government hasn't any control over MI5, MI6 and all sorts of things. But 75% of what happens in Britain, the economy, there's no democratic control. And the idea that we should control that. We should control where the money is invested. We should control things where jobs should go, etc. It's a very simple idea that we are capable of running it. If you want to dispute this, I'll just ask you, if you want to get from Euston Station tonight to anywhere up the West Coast line, don't ask Richard Branson to take you. If you go into a hospital, do not ask the chief executive to patch you up. If you go to those who are at university and want to find out where anything is, or if the boiler breaks down or something like that, do not ask the vice-chancellor. Go and find a janitor. These people give themselves huge pay rises, they don't do anything. It's us that do it, and we can run it. We run it anyway. We're running it all the time. We keep it going. And the idea that we can rule is a very obvious and basic one. It's good sense, right? And we should push it. And we're going to have to fight for that. And Marx says it begins with the idea that it's just us versus the tyrant. But it has to end by saying that we have to remove this system. A revolution. That we have to build from the bottom up a society based on a far more democratic basis than anything we live in now. And it will require a revolution. And I'll just leave you this last thought. For those of you, who are worried, and all of us should be, about climate change, the news that this conference in Copenhagen is not going to come to any agreement whatsoever. So you might think, for the environment's sake, why bother flying all there? Just scrap it. I mean, seriously, Phil, you might just think that. But Obama, in which people have huge hopes on this issue, cannot even get the American state to sign up to Kyoto, let alone this. And the simple truth is that no American president is going to sign up to anything which goes against the interests of the oil companies, the car companies and the rubber companies. And how are we going to get reverse climate change? Well, we can't do it by electing a president if that's the case. We're going to have to do it. It's going to require radical, revolutionary change to save the planet. And that's the argument, I think, tonight for why Marx should be back and why you should be a socialist.